Hi friends, thank you for tuning in to the Concussion Coach podcast. I'm Bethany Lewis, the Concussion Coach. I'm a neurological occupational therapist and certified life coach, and I specialize in guiding people through their concussion recovery journey. I am passionate about helping people understand their injury, speed up their recovery, and reclaim control over their life post-concussion. The purpose of this podcast is to help increase awareness of concussions and the impact they can have on a person's life, and to bring hope to people who have suffered a concussion and those who love them. I firmly believe that sharing stories and knowledge about concussions will bring important light and understanding to this misunderstood and often invisible injury. The information in this podcast is meant to bring that awareness and hope and is not meant as medical advice. The opinions shared are those of the interviewees and my own. If you are suffering with lingering concussion symptoms, I have created a concussion coaching program specifically for you. I will be your mentor to guide you through your recovery journey, offering help with understanding and managing your symptoms, setting achievable goals, and learning how to manage your own thoughts and nervous system in order to get control over your life again. If this program sounds like something that would help you or someone you love, sign up for a free consultation. In the consultation, you'll get valuable information and resources and gain hope for your future. Sign up for your free consultation at the link in the show notes or at my website, www.theconcussioncoach.com. Welcome, friends. I'm excited to introduce you to my friend Kenny Hunsaker. Kenny and I met when we both lived in China back in 2011. My husband Thane and I moved there with our 2-year-old and our 3-month-old when he took a job doing consulting for Adobe in Beijing. Kenny and his family had already been there for years and ended up staying a lot longer than we were there too. And I'll let him tell you more about what brought them there in a minute. But the friendships that we made during our time in China are some of the closest we have, and we've stayed in touch with many of those amazing people that we met there. And Kenny and his awesome wife, Carrie, are some of those dear friends. And during one of the Beijing reunions that we have, he noticed that my jacket said Cognitive FX on it, and we started chatting about the concussion he had experienced. I'll let him finish this story as well, but as that's the nutshell version of how we met and why we're having this conversation today. So thank you so much for being willing to come and share your concussion experience with us today, Kenny. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Bethany, for having me. So when we met in Beijing. I was there doing business development for an ag machinery company, started our sales and service office there in 2009, and we stayed until 2017. And so we had, the end of 2017. So yeah, about 8.5 years.
That's a long time.
Yeah, awesome. It was a great experience, and I don't think anyone in our family would change one bit of that.
Were all of your kids born there?
No, our first wasn't. Our first was born in the States, but our second two were born in Beijing. So, and they do cherish that too. They think it's pretty cool that their birth certificate is Chinese first, and then it's a consular report of birth abroad. So,
wow, that is cool.
Yeah.
That is cool. So tell us a little bit more about you. Where are you from? What brought you to China? Oh, I guess you just told us it's ag machinery. Is that what you said? Agriculture?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. And where are you guys now? Tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, so involved in a technology company now that we started a few years ago, doing ag logistics management software. So when we moved back from China, we moved briefly to Idaho and then to Utah, and moved to Utah in 2018, and have been here since then, working here. And yeah, and my concussion happened only, a couple miles from my house. Car accident. Yeah, when I saw your jacket, Cognitive FX, I'd had a friend that had been through Cognitive FX's week-long program years prior, probably like 2 or 3 years before that, but kind of got me on the right path. That was like 18 months after I'd had my concussion, I think, is when we had that reunion.
Wow.
Because it was I remember it was about a year after I told you that I decided to do it. Yes. And that it had been 2.5 years after my concussion. So
yeah. Sounds about right. So what happened with your injury? How did that come about?
Just a minor car accident, actually. I don't think it was the first concussion that I'd had, but it was the first diagnosed concussion that I'd had. I wrecked my mountain bike the year before in the summer, and didn't really have I didn't have any symptoms of a concussion at the time. But my helmet had a big crack in the back of it where I hit my head. But I didn't think much of it. I was a little exhausted the first couple of days, and that wasn't a concussion. Didn't even cross my mind because I wasn't nauseous. I didn't, throw up or anything like that. I wasn't dizzy. I mean, I rode my bike out from our ride after I wrecked. I mean, it wasn't something that I thought could have been a precursor, but I think it probably was. And then the minor car accident, we were going through a stoplight. Someone was turning left on a yellow and just hit my door, and I hit my head. And we were doing, I think 25, 30 miles an hour, probably about by the time we slowed down when we got hit, but it jarred us pretty hard. And I hit my head. I actually hit it in two places. Didn't know that until the next day, because I drove the car home.
Mm. Did you get diagnosed with a concussion then? Like, did you know at that point?
2 days after. So 2 days later, I went to the doctor, because the day after I had the worst headache of my life. And I was like, well, I hit my head. I mean, in two places. I have a goose egg here and one back here. And I didn't even know that I hit it here. And interestingly enough, as I found out later, those are the parts of the brain that I struggled with the most, right here and right there. So it was pretty obvious that that was the case later on. But I did get diagnosed with a concussion. I think it was 2 or 3 days after.
Okay. And just for those who are listening, the right here and here are like the left side near the front, and then kind of on the side, right? Is that all right?
Yep.
Man, what did they do to diagnose you?
They basically, I just went to an urgent care and told them the symptoms I was having, and he gave me some pain medicine and referred me to an orthopedist, like sports medicine. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's kind of, just based on our discussion today and some of the things we're going to talk about, I think that's the common line that people probably go through, is they go to their urgent care or primary care, and then they go to a specialist. But it's like it needs to take a different path to the right specialist.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about the injuries or the symptoms that you had following the injury.
So the symptoms that I had, like I said, immediately was a headache, and I couldn't stay asleep. I had no problem falling asleep, just normal at night, but I would only sleep for 2 hours and then I'd be awake. And didn't matter what time I went to bed, I couldn't stay asleep. And that was, I think, a precursor of a lot of the other post-concussion syndrome symptoms that I had. Because I was diagnosed by the orthopedist with a concussion. I did have some dizziness and some balance issues at first. And when it didn't go away after about 2 or 3 weeks, he referred me to start doing some occupational therapy to get rid of the dizziness and some of that stuff. And then it was evident in that I needed that there were other things that were in the way that were cognitive. So, and that's when I went to a cognitive therapist. So the lack of sleep was the biggest one up front. But it was a precursor to lack of focus and attention, like an inability to have any kind of executive function, like planning a work day or like a family trip on a weekend was nearly impossible, and given a bunch of options. So there was a very specific exercise I remember from one of the cognitive therapists that was when it was probably the height of struggle for me, was trying to work through some of that part of it to have the executive function, and the inability to follow conversations. If it was a long conversation, I would lose track of where we were at in the conversation. I wouldn't be able to focus, and very large emotional swings. When I was working through at Cognitive FX, we were, it was the saw blade. It was the violent upswings and down, and it was just up and down and up and down all the time. And really getting rid of those peaks and valleys was about the only way to make it, get back to somewhat of normal. So
yeah, we'll definitely be diving into the things that were helpful. So that's
yeah.
I'm curious, with the different people that you saw, like how frequently were you seeing them, and what so you start out at urgent care, orthopedist, occupational therapist, cognitive therapist. Were they all part of a similar group, or were they all individually recommended? How did that come about?
So I recommended from the urgent care to orthopedist. The orthopedist referred me to he actually referred me to the physical therapy unit that the occupational and cognitive therapist we're part of.
Okay.
And that process, I started the occupational stuff a couple of weeks after, when I still was having the dizziness and things. I went back for my follow-up with the doctor after a couple of weeks. He had me go there. I started twice a week there for a couple of weeks was all, and then it was once a week for I think a month and a half, and then it was once a week in cognitive therapy for about 6 months.
Okay.
And probably could have been less than that, but they kind of kicked me out because it was like the only thing that I felt like I kept going and wanted to keep going because it was how I reset my brain every week. It was almost like the part of my week. It was like, I know when I'm done with the therapy, I'm going to feel bad for a day and then I'm going to feel good. Okay. And then it was the next, and by the time I went the next week, I needed it again. And just, it was almost routine.
Interesting. And that lasted for about 6 months?
Yeah, so the accident was in September. It was until May. So I started going in, I think end of November. So about 6.5 months. Yeah.
And what ended up, they just discharged you? It was like time to be done, or why did you stop?
Yeah. Well, I kind of reached what the therapist thought was their ability to help me progress any further. And basically, work on these things at home, and and everybody kind of knows how that goes. You do them sometimes, you don't do them most of the time. When you don't have somebody there helping you, but you get caught up in home life, and so you just you kind of forget about doing them. So yeah, but that was kind of it. And then it wasn't until 6 months later that you and I talked.
Okay. And do you feel like you had made progress? Like, did things resolve at all, or how did that play out for you?
Actually, I think that they plateaued. So the initial therapies helped me get through the initial phases a lot, and helped me identify some of the things that kept me on that seesaw, the ups and downs. They helped me identify things that, for lack of a better word, triggered my brain and started me down, kind of spiraling down. And one of the main symptoms that surprised me the most was the emotional instability, like the anxiety, the depression, to a certain extent, even suicidal ideation. Right. Like I didn't have my concussion was not severe as I think of it. I mean, I had no physical symptoms. You couldn't tell that I've been in a car wreck. You couldn't see any of it. Yeah. And so, you feel like you're almost that you're an imposter and that you're milking it if you have like these symptoms that people can't see, because they'd be like, oh, if you had told me you had a concussion, I wouldn't even have known.
Yes. That's what people talk about all the time. It's so hard because nobody can see it, and yet it's all there. It's very much there. But you even question yourself, right? Like how was that for you?
Well, you question yourself, and you start to doubt that you even have symptoms, that it just becomes this mental game that you're playing with yourself, or you're using it as a cop out because you don't want to do something, or those things. And it's hard to get past that, especially when sometimes you feel just fine. I mean, I run all the time, and that was one of the things that it was like, well, I must be fine because I can go run 5 miles every day, run 25 or 30 miles a week and be fine. So
and I'm fine. I can do these things,
but you ask me to plan my day with the different tasks that I have to do and categorize things and follow a conversation, and it's totally different.
Did you recognize all of those things, and including the emotional ups and downs, as being related to the concussion? You knew they were all from that, or were you not sure about that?
I wasn't sure about it at first. And that's where I think that the initial therapy was a big help, specifically the cognitive therapy, because the occupational stuff and getting rid of dizziness, that was fairly straightforward to me. It was like, oh, bit by bit, there's progress here. And, and then I didn't really have many of those symptoms. until I was extremely fatigued, like brain fatigued. And then I would be like, why am I dizzy? You know, and then the physical things would come back, the headaches and that type of stuff. But yeah, it was, you just you question what's going on. And I think without having somebody there to help me understand what was happening, it would have been a lot worse because I just thought I felt sorry for myself at first.
Mm. Yeah, that's one of the things that I just, again, want people to know, like, you're not crazy. You've had a concussion. It's not you being
Yeah.
lazy. It's not just, yeah, trying to cop out for things. It's legitimate. Yeah.
That's funny that you say the phrase, you're not crazy, because that's one of my friends who'd had a concussion that I talked to about it very early on. He was like, remember, you're not crazy. He goes, it'll feel like you're crazy. And I didn't know what that felt like until I felt that. And then I was like, yeah, this is exactly what this feels like, is that I'm just kind of losing my mind.
Can you describe that more? Like, what was that like? What made you think that you were crazy?
Well, I mean, it's just the symptoms in general. I mean, I'd never struggled with any kind of like emotional or behavioral, problems before. And so identifying that for me it was like experiencing, well, the therapist, one of the ways she put it was, like the symptoms they start to look like ADD and ADHD. And I'd never dealt with either one of those before. And yeah, that's really what it felt like. Is it's like I could never finish a task. I would always start something and never finish it. I would move to the next thing because I think it's more important. And like, and then nothing would ever be done. And that's like work life, home life. It was, it was very apparent that that was happening.
Yeah. How apparent was it to your family? I want to hear, how did this affect the people who were closest to you?
Um, I think it was hard for them at first to know. I mean, because we're a pretty active family, and we go do things, and we're always kind of together doing stuff, and I just couldn't do those things. And so at first it was doing too much physical, like in the initial phases after, for actually it was for a couple of months. I couldn't, if my heart rate got above 100, that's when I would start to have the symptoms come back. Like, and so exercise, like it was like, hey, go on a walk, and it's like walk to the end of the block, but you don't get your heart rate above 100 because that's where we've tested on the treadmill at the office. And and that's where you start to tip over. And so I think it was hard for them to adjust their expectations of what I could do.
That was initially, right?
And
Because you said later you
yeah,
were able to run with.
yeah. Uh-huh. And and but the frequency of like, and I actually, this is one of the things that I've talked about before, and it came up in one of the sessions with my therapist that I don't mind sharing, is that um, my kids got used to hearing the phrase, sorry, dad can't do that, either from me or from Carrie, all too frequently. And that actually was hard for me, because they want to go do stuff, and they want to play, and they want this and do that, and like come ride bikes or play basketball or soccer or whatever.
Wow.
And to just not be able to do that because you're having those swings. I mean, before the concussion, it was, unless I was doing something else, I'd go do that stuff. And so now it's like, nope, we got to regulate that, because for 3 of the last 5 days have been bad days, and so
That would be hard because it wasn't like you were doing something else. It was internally, I'm dealing with something else, and so I can't do it. And they couldn't.
yeah. And it might be that you're just sitting on the couch, just sitting there, and it's like, I can't read a book, I can't watch TV, I just want to sit here.
Yeah. That is so hard. I'm so sorry. I mean, kids are resilient. I imagine
Yeah, they are.
they were good about it.
Mm-hmm.
How did Carrie help you? Or what did she, like, did she know what to do to help?
She could tell when I was starting to decline, for lack of a better word. So she could tell when I get overdone. When I was overstimmed, that's the word we use, overstim and destim a lot in our house.
Those are important words for everyone to know, I think.
Yeah, they really are. I mean, there's things I've learned through the concussion like through this whole process, that it's like, oh, these are actually tools that would probably be helpful for even people who haven't had a concussion.
Yes, so many.
But yeah, she could tell. And I think she could tell just because of our relationship and how I was responding. And then she would be able to help soften the downward spiral, the downward slope, I should say, and have me, stop preemptively, because she would notice it almost before I would, whether it was in how I was communicating or what I was doing, those things. So I think that was, she was very helpful in that way.
That's good. Yeah, there's a lot of times people, one of the things that come along with a concussion is a like decreased sense of self-awareness. Like sometimes people don't see how they're being affected as much as the people who are with them all the time see it. So it doesn't surprise me at all that she could see sometimes before you felt it, that you were going to need some time out or whatever. Yeah. Well, is there anything else about the experience of having a concussion that surprised you? Like, did you know a lot about concussions beforehand?
I didn't really know much about concussions. I'd only been with one person when they'd had a concussion, and his concussion, it was my brother-in-law. He didn't know where he was for about half a day. And that was and I was like, that was it. And then he was fine. Mm-hmm. And those were interesting symptoms. I'd never experienced anything like that. But I just the strangeness in it was how my brain tried to overcompensate for things that it couldn't do in a normal way anymore. It just got really overdone trying to do it inefficiently. Mm-hmm. And so the word finding was probably the most frustrating. Once I would get fatigued, I wouldn't be able to say what I wanted to say. I could think it, but it was like you couldn't find the words to say it. I think that was probably the most frustrating symptom, honestly, was being able to not express myself. It was also a dead ringer for if I was having symptoms too, but
for sure. When I can't speak anymore, that's when I'm done. Yeah. Oh, interesting. So what were the things, treatments or therapies did you try? So we know a few of them. What was the most helpful, and what else have you done?
So I think that like I said, the cognitive therapy at first was very helpful. And exercise was very helpful. This is all pre-cognitive FX. I'll just kind of date that. So for about the first year and a half, well, actually it would have been 2 years. Yeah. Almost 2.5 years till I went to cognitive FX. Once I was done with the initial therapy, I found that if I could sleep well and exercise, that I was okay. Like that I could not okay, but I could keep the plateau. I wasn't really improving, but only when I would get extremely physically fatigued would I get symptoms again. But life is life, and as your kids get older and you're involved in more things, you start to, you get a little run down every now and then. So, I mean, you just get busier and busier, and so it was hard to stay on top of that. I'd miss one night of sleep and then have a down day and a half or 2 days. Like not miss the whole night of sleep, but like just not sleep well, or be busy for 3 days in a row and then be out for a day and a half because you're just not really super functional.
Yeah. Did you have to take time off of work?
Officially, a few times at the beginning. Whereas working from home at the time, it was more take breaks here and there, but I would have to break up my day, like try and focus on something for a couple hours and then take a break. Before we jumped on this call, I've had a lot going on in the last few days, and just like before we jumped on, I did my brainwaves for 15 minutes with a blackout eye mask and the noise canceling headphones. And it's amazing what just taking all the stimulus away from your brain does to reset it. Some of that I had tried before the clinic, but I don't think I really realized how important it was to do that. I would take breaks, like stop working, go do something like make lunch and read a book. Well, guess what? That's not destimming your brain. You're still using it. You're just doing something different.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that was the most helpful. I had to get on a regular sleep schedule. I couldn't go to bed at 10 one night and 1 a.m. the next night and 10:30 and 11. And it was be in bed asleep by 11.
And when you said that you kind of plateaued with the symptoms, like was the more physical symptoms, the headaches and the fatigue and all of that, I assume that's partly what you're talking about, but was it the emotional symptoms as well? Were the emotions still all over the place the whole time, or did those calm down too, unless you got overstimulated?
Really what drove me to seek extra treatment was that physical symptoms I'd plateaued. I wasn't having really any more, and they wouldn't come on unless I was having the emotional and cognitive ones hit. And those emotional ones, they would hit frequently when I was stressed or like I said, or run down. But they were happening way too frequently. And yeah, those were the ones that they plateaued in a certain sense, but they were still so far from what I felt like was normal for me that and I would say that they didn't get better over time. I would actually say that the effects of them got worse because they were so much more frustrating because they weren't going away. So the episodes probably were happening about the same frequency, but the impact of each one of those just consistently built because there wasn't any resolution to it.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's just kind of layering on top of each other because you're more and more frustrated that they were happening.
Yeah, and it just kind of, it's like a flywheel and just keeps getting worse and worse.
Yeah. So you were in that like kind of plateau phase after the initial therapies for a while, sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
Were there other things you tried in that time, or did you, and then what happened then? I guess that's when we had our conversation at the Beijing reunion.
Yeah, I didn't really try anything else. It was just like, these are the things I know I can do. I need to sleep, I need to exercise. And when this starts to happen, like with my brain, if I start to have this type of a headache or have any kind of brain fog or this, then I just need to stop what I'm doing and try and take a break. And that was just how I managed it. I mean, people that I work with can attest to it, that there were just days that I didn't, it was like, okay, I'm done for the day. Like, that's kind of where it would be like, it could be at any time. We're traveling with somebody for work to a trade show. Trade shows, all the noise, it takes you out because you can't, it's so hard to focus. So
then you just kind of thought that was your new normal. Is that what?
Yeah, basically you just get to the point where it was like, well, I guess this is the new normal and this is how I have to mitigate it now. And you just it just becomes routine. It's not, it's not that you want it that way, but there's not a lot of help beyond that. I was referred to like a concussion clinic that wasn't Cognitive FX that I thought about going to and didn't, because it was mainly for athletes. And, and I think it was in Park City at one of the Olympic sports facilities or something. And I just thought, that's not my kind of concussion.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, it was like, you read about how they'd helped all these people and it's like, but that's not, I don't need help with any of those things. So that's not for me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you had heard of Cognitive FX before. And this, again, I just want to throw this out here. This is not like Cognitive FX, which I also will refer to as CFX. They're not promoting this. They're not telling me to do this. I just am wanting people to get help. So I want to throw this out there that this is helpful. This is what I highly encouraged Kenny to go there, or at least to look into it. But just because I know that it does make a difference for people who think that they're in their new normal and have lost hope of anything else. So tell us about, your experience with that.
It was really interesting. My evaluation with Dr. Fong at first, I just ran through kind of what we'd run through today. with her, and she laid out the plan that would, it was really interesting to me, is like I got emotional hearing her talk about what I was experiencing, because she had such an in-depth knowledge of it, and how those symptoms interact with each other and why they do, and how, you know, it gave me hope. And maybe that's why I was emotional. But it gave me hope. And she actually, she, when in our discussion, and she was going through symptoms, and I'd never told anybody about the suicidal ideation ever. And we were talking through things, and she said, so, you know, some of these emotional symptoms, like you may have even like had some of these that, you know, like, anyway, we were just talking through it, and she mentioned that, and I was really surprised, because I didn't think that was, I mean, I'd been depressed, so I mean, naturally it would have been a symptom. I just never really considered it nor thought that much about it.
Yeah.
But it talking with her in that initial visit gave me hope that I should pursue it, because it was a consultation. There was not an obligation to do anything, but it gave me I guess the will and the desire, regardless of the time and the expense, to try something to make it work, to fix it. And so, yeah, I'd never done a functional MRI before. But I've learned so much about the brain since that first functional MRI, that now whenever I read anything about, you know, brain injury and healing and some of these other things, and how different things affect your body, and it's just like, you know, hot and cold therapy and all of these things, like your brain is a muscle that you can train, and you can fix it in a lot of ways, not every way, but there are things that don't have to be the new norm. And so that week was brutal.
Well, hold on. Before we get into the week, I want to hear, how did you end up? So you and I talked at the reunion, and then it was a year before you, like, when did you end up?
That was about 10 and a half months before I had my consultation. So that was in January or February, and my consultation was in November, my MRI in December, and I went to the clinic in January.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
So
curious, was it just like, why the delay to get it, to do the consultation?
Time was one. Even being in software, ag is more busy when it's warm outside than when it's cold. That was one. I had more time in the fall and the winter, late fall and in the winter, but it was more of the same. It's that we talked about it, Carrie and I debated it. Should we do it? I don't know. And then, you know, it just became one of those things. It's like, I don't want the time I'm like, I'm in my early 40s. Like, I don't want the rest of my life to be this, you know. It's already been a couple of years. I mean, I met patients at the clinic that had their concussion 10 years ago. And, you know, you start to realize, like, you know, there's more to life than dealing with this type of stuff. So
yeah. So okay, so you ended up deciding to go, and you went in January, and how was that experience for you?
It was awesome. So I learned a lot in the first day, and that was the exercise that I was doing wasn't bringing on my physical symptoms, but I could bring on my physical symptoms with what was it, 20 minutes of intervals. And that the type of exercise mattered that I did to help heal my brain. And you know, that was probably one of the biggest things that I learned that the first part of the week. But also that some of the exercises were the same ones I had done in therapy before, but everything was on a timeline, and we were doing physical and cognitive all back to back. Then we would, you know, de-stim for 30 minutes and do it again. And I think it was Wednesday, I stayed there. Like, I stayed at the clinic for like an hour and a half after, because I couldn't. I was like, I got to sit here and just zone, because my symptoms of fatigue are almost like you can't find your breath. Not that you're hyperventilating, but that you can't, like, it's almost like every breath is a sigh, because you're exerting so much energy to do it.
Thank you for sharing this, because I think people who have experienced it will know exactly what you're talking about. And those of us,
I hope so.
we wouldn't even think that that was a thing, you know? So I appreciate you sharing these kinds of details. So
yeah. And I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday, but I could see that my resiliency through the different exercises and things, it was no less frustrating than it was when I did it a year and a half before.
Mhm.
In fact, it was just as frustrating or more, because and all the same emotions came back, everything, working through the similar problems. I mean, I'll never look at face cards the same way again, because sorting cards is like, the worst. but at the same time, and for everybody, I mean, I have a shirt from Cognitive FX that says, and it's actually a bar chart that is red, yellow, and green. And it's like, if you know, that's what it says on it. And it's like, yeah,
That's hilarious.
yeah. And I mean, yeah. And for people listening, that's the functional MRI range. Like, if you know, like, if red, yellow, and green, like, you've seen the report, you'll know what it looks like. And anyway, it was just interesting to see that first benchmark from the first MRI, go through all of the exercises, some of them which seemed mundane and just kind of pointless, to ones that were like, this is what I had to do to, like, to make my symptoms improve. Like releasing the tension in the muscles in the back of my neck and skull by doing tongue exercises that make you look like a crazy man. But that you can actually feel it release in your head. You feel the muscle release, and that little improvement actually improves your cognitive function. And that it's how all of it is tied together was very interesting, and that it was personal. It was a clinic, and for people that don't know the program, you're there with a cohort of people that all have varying levels of concussions and physical symptoms and emotional symptoms, but it's all personalized therapy. And that personalized therapy is based on your symptoms and your functional MRI. And for me, I'm glad I didn't have to do a second week, or didn't need to do a second week. But coupling all those exercises with the actual, like, psychiatrist, like met with her a couple of times during the same week, and developing a personalized plan for me, and then to see how I'd improved in a week. To see the next, and not everybody saw big improvements that they had hoped at first, but we're all in a group chat together on WhatsApp, and we all talk about stuff. It's like, it's what about this? And like, I've had some of this still happening, and some people think they've plateaued. I don't think that I've been this good since before my concussion.
It was January, so this was, what, 4 months ago?
Yeah. And I would say that most of February and most of March, I couldn't have said that. Like, it was still, but that was expected, and that they'd prepared us for that. They're like, look, this, you're going to do worse before you do better, because we've really hammered your brain. And for lack of a better word. And I think that, so now I do interval training. I don't run nearly as much distance running, because it doesn't help my brain in the same way that the interval training does.
Can you feel the difference with the intervals?
Absolutely. One thing that I've taken away from the program there that I do every day is I go to bed about the same time every day. I wake up at the same time. And as soon as I'm awake, I do the interval training for 20 or 30 minutes, then do meditation to de-stim, and then go about my day. And it's just, that's how it starts. And, every day is different, but it's very predictable now. And it's almost like I can say, if I do this, it's not going to happen.
Wow.
And so I feel empowered by that.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
that I actually have control of my life in some way again.
Oh, it's a beautiful thing. I'm so glad to hear that. That's amazing. And do you feel like I mean, everybody's recovery is different, everything is different, but do you feel like pretty much all of your symptoms have been able to get under control, like your back, or do you still feel like you have the swings? Like how are things going with that?
Um,
If you don't mind sharing.
yeah, like I would say that, like, just before we started today, when we were chatting, it's probably happened, 3, maybe 4 times. I mean, I actually wanted to document how many times I'd had symptoms come back on where I could identify them as symptoms, and I just haven't been very good at doing that. But that's because they don't happen very frequently. And so I look at that as a win as well.
Yeah, right?
That it's like, if I can't remember the last time that they happened, it's like I told you, yesterday and the day before, my schedule was just all out of whack. We had late nights and lots of kids activities, and it definitely played a role in how I felt the next day. And not in a normal way. I mean, if people listening will be like, well, that's anybody, like,
Right.
you don't sleep one night, you're not going to be the same the next day. But, from my symptom standpoint, I can tell a headache from a concussion headache and those types of things. And I can tell when I'm stressed and when it's irrational anxiety. And I think that's, yeah, I mean, those are things now that I can distinguish that before I couldn't.
Yeah.
And so, but
Well,
yeah, it doesn't happen very frequently.
That's fantastic. And it's awesome that you know what to do to get back into that, like to get control over your life again. Like you said, that's huge. That's amazing. So what advice would you give to people who are dealing with a concussion and the people who love them?
Well, the first thing is, if you've had the concussion, you're not crazy. Like, I think that, like, you'll feel like it, but you're not. I mean, you're having pretty standard post concussion syndrome, the symptoms that you have. You may not even be diagnosed with PCS. That's another thing I've learned, is a lot of people don't ever get diagnosed with it. But I think that's also the treatment path that they went down. Mm-hmm. If they have somebody that knows a lot, then they might get the right diagnosis. But the advice I would give is be patient, whether you're the one going through it or the person, like a loved one that it happens to, is be patient and encourage them. Make sure they're emotionally healthy, because they might put on a pretty face and you just don't know, and proper sleep. I think that's very personal to me, because it was the first symptom that was really bad and out of the ordinary. Like, oh, that's not I mean, people that get concussions want to sleep all the time. That's what you hear,
Right,
and it's like, no, I was the opposite. I was fine. And then I could go to sleep just fine, and I could never stay asleep. And so I became an insomniac. Mm-hmm. So yeah, be patient. And yeah, I mean, so many of the symptoms that I had were, like I said, they weren't visible to anybody that wasn't pretty close to me. Mm-hmm. Because when you start to feel that way, you remove yourself from the crowd. So you're never around people when your symptoms are at their highest. Yes. And so it's hard for people to recognize. So if you have somebody that just be patient, make sure that their mental health is in check.
Yeah. So for you, was it helpful if this happened, or would it have been helpful for people to check in with you and see how you were doing? Or like, did you want to talk about it? How was that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'd never been to therapy before, and that was a new thing for me. But having somebody to talk to about it was very important. Mm-hmm. Somebody that knew, not even a loved one. I mean, family members, you talk to them about it, and they might know what to say, but they also are kind of at a loss of how to help you, other than just be encouraging and understanding. But having somebody to talk to that legitimately knows what you're going through, I think, was extremely important for my well-being anyway. And that the cognitive therapy that I went to first, it gave me an outlet to talk through everything that was happening.
Okay. So whether it's an official like therapist for depression, anxiety, or if it's somebody who knows
Mhm.
about concussions and can understand what's going on for you, like.
Yeah, and in her case, she was a cognitive, I think, actually a speech therapist.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's good to know. Yeah. Something that people talk about sometimes is not knowing how to talk to people about their injury. Like, was it helpful for you to let other people know? Did you just not want to let people know about it and just retreat? Or like what was that like for you?
Well, like I think we mentioned it a little bit before. It's not guilt, but it's a feeling of like I'm fine because visually there's nothing wrong with me. I mean, if I have a broken arm and it's in a cast, people know that I can't bend that wrist.
Mhm.
So it's not you're never asked to bend your wrist.
Right.
And so but with the cognitive stuff, like I said, if they don't, I don't know, because they didn't know, like for me to talk about it, it's almost like I felt a little bit of, I felt a little ashamed, like that I was making a bigger deal of it than it was. I mean, I guess is a good way to put it. Yeah, because it didn't really affect most interactions that I had. And yeah, I think if that kind of answers your question.
So you didn't always want to talk about it, sounds like.
Yeah, that's probably a good way to say it. Yeah.
This is another thing or an issue that comes up for people is whether or not to tell their employer that they've had this experience and that their brain isn't working like it used to. Like, it's a two-edged sword, right? Like, you want people to know so that you can get the breaks that you need and the rest that you need so you can perform well. But you're also, sometimes people are afraid to even bring it up because, the brain is an important part of their job. And what if their employer thinks they can't do it anymore? Like, there's a lot to it. So if you don't mind sharing your experience with that, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Luckily for me, in my circumstance, is I'm mostly self-employed, and the team that I work with, it was all pretty understanding. But there was an element of that. You don't really want to talk about it too much because you don't want to. I didn't want to be seen as being incapable of doing a task that I was given.
Yeah.
But it was very obvious in the background sometimes that at the time I was not capable of doing it. And there were a number of times specifically I remember of having to just tell my teammates, my coworkers that, look, I can't do this right now.
Mm.
And that puts pressure on them. We're a small company, small team. And, if you can't do it, someone else has to do it.
Yeah.
And so I guess it is a little bit of guilt. You do feel guilty pushing that back to them. And so that was hard. It didn't have to happen a lot. And like I said, luckily for me, I didn't work in a company where my boss would see that as something that was, take care of yourself and get your job done kind of a thing. And that was where we settled. So
That's good. I'm glad that that you were able to get the leeway that you needed to do what you needed to do to take care of yourself. That's important.
yeah, but I could see that being an issue because even on our team that's pretty close, that was not something I really wanted to bring up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So is that, now that you're feeling like you're more on the other side of things, is that something that you do talk about? Like, do you let people know, or is it still, it's just like, okay, that was a thing that happened in my life and we're moving forward? Like, I'm just curious how that.
No, it does. It depends on who I'm talking to about it, but it does come up every now and then. And like I said, since that last round of treatment at Cognitive FX, I haven't really had to bring that up. And that's something that's like, oh, okay, well, if you didn't have to bring it up, then it didn't happen enough that it was an issue,
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Oh, that's a beautiful thing. So what advice would you give to either to yourself or to other, like, if you could go back in time, advice to yourself or others who are dealing with concussions?
seek the best help you can the fastest. Like I waited too long. I mean, I envied the people that were in the clinic that only found 2.5 years, because of my own stubbornness. I could have been there sooner. But
It's hard to know.
you
There's so
know,
much out there. It totally is understandable as to why
yeah,
it takes some time. Your journey was the way it was supposed to be, right? Like, you were
right.
found it when you needed to and had the experiences to let you know, okay, now it's time. Like, I think you did it
Yeah,
right. But yeah, that's good advice still.
I would say find more help faster because the way that the system kind of works for concussions, it puts you on a path that may not get you. I was lucky that it got me to actually an occupational therapist, I think, because I was in that process. It was the the occupational therapist. Occupational therapist is who said I should see the speech therapist. And it was just kind of this progress that I think, had it been different, I don't think I would have had that same path, because if you stopped and didn't actually have to go to any therapy, and you just went to your medical provider, you might have been given 3 or 4 drugs, one to make you sleep, one to keep you awake, and one for the headaches. And I mean, I'm not on a diatribe or anything here, but that's kind of how the process works. And if I didn't have good people in that path, I don't think I would have been as lucky. So if you have suffered a concussion, I would recommend trying to find not the alternative path, but I was surprised when I was referred to a speech therapist. I'll just put it that way. I was like, well, yeah, I can't walk down a hallway keeping my balance and try and name chocolate candy bars, but what does that got to do with like saying words?
Right. So be open-minded. This is good.
Be open-minded. I mean, and that was literally what she was like. I think you need to talk to her, and because you're fine until we start to do this other stuff, and then you're not fine.
Yep. That's
so
awesome.
Yeah, be open-minded, because that was a good way to summarize it. Be open-minded.
Good. Awesome. So how have you maintained hope through this recovery journey? This is one of the things that I want to just touch on. I think it's an important thing. Like you said, like when you got emotional when you talked to Dr. Fong, because there was hope, right? Like the hope thing is really important. So what has helped you maintain that hope throughout this path? Or did you? Maybe that's a better question. Were you able to? How did you, if you did?
I think at certain points I did, and that's when I was seeing improvement. And it was really hard to find hope when I wasn't seeing any significant improvement, which I think is one of the primary reasons that drove me to seek out Cognitive FX and see if it was something that could help me. Because at that point, I was kind of like, this is it. This is kind of my last thing that I can try. I mean, one thing we didn't talk about that I did try was like breathwork meditation. It's also very helpful because it de-stims your brain. And I didn't really make that connection at first, but it's very helpful in that regard. But I was kind of at the end of my rope as far as with what I could do, and maintaining hope was hard when I wasn't seeing improvement in some way. But every time I found something new, like first it was therapy, then it was breath work, and then exercise and regular sleep just before Cognitive FX, and then the right kind of exercise. That's what I needed. I needed the right kind of exercise. There was more improvement. So I do think that there's still room for improvement. And I guess that, I just kind of have faith that there is more to it than that. I don't know. I'm not sure how else to describe how to keep the hope other than talking to people that have been through it. I mean, that's a huge one. And I think that's why talking to the therapist and then to Dr. Fong and the therapist at the clinic as you're going through all of the treatment exercises is so helpful, because they've seen other people benefit from it.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's like, I don't think I'd really ever been part of that kind of a community where it was like, yeah, I've been through that. I know where you are. This is where you can get to. Just keep going and you'll get there. Yeah. And until this experience, I mean, I would never want to do this again, but I would probably never change what I've learned from it.
That's beautifully said. And again, part of why I'm grateful that you're sharing all of this is because there are so many people who haven't found what you found and aren't along their journey as far as you are. And so that's going to be really helpful for them, I hope.
I hope so too. It's not an easy thing to go through or to understand when you're going through it.
Yes. So is there anything else as we wrap up here, anything else about concussions or about what you've learned through this journey, or that you just want people to know that would be helpful for people that we haven't touched on yet?
I do. I'm 100% believer in de-stimming your brain.
Okay.
Like it's a 15 minutes. I mean, you get a black eye mask that blacks out any light, and you don't even have to stay awake. I mean, it's not a nap, but you're listening to uh different frequencies of sound with ambient noise in the background, and not being able to hear anything but that or see anything. And it really is powerful. It's powerful to just reset for the day. Like, if you're stressed out, it's a good management technique to just get your brain back to baseline, and whether it's a concussion or not.
Yes. Awesome. So Brainwaves it's just called the Brainwaves app, right? That's the one that you're using.
Yeah. And it's not sponsored.
Yeah. Again, we should. I should reach out to them and see if they will.
I bet they would. But I don't know if they have a free version, but it wasn't free, but it's not expensive, and it's worth every penny that we've paid for it. I mean, my kids have used it, and if they're stressed out, if a 9-year-old is stressed out and needs to reset, she knows what to do. Yeah.
Big deal. So. That's huge. Not only beneficial for concussion people, but for everybody, including children. Yeah, that's awesome. Yep.
And on the concussion side, like I said, just everybody's different, but you've got this. You just need to find what works and keep pushing forward, because keep an open mind, because what worked for me might not work for you, and vice versa. So.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being willing again to come on here and share your story, share your experience, and offer some hope to those who are also going through it. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I'm so glad you listened in today. I hope you have gained some helpful insights and inspiration regarding dealing with and recovering from concussions. My goal is to create more awareness and education about concussions and the fact that there is so much that can be done to improve life after someone has had one. Help me spread the message by liking, commenting, rating, and subscribing to this podcast, and share it with others who would benefit from hearing it. There are more resources available on my website. And again, if you or someone you love would benefit from concussion coaching, sign up for a free consultation using the link in the show notes or at my website, www.theconcussioncoach.com. Thank you. See you next time, and take good care of that amazing brain of yours.